Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Atamanova, and it's my pleasure to welcome you at Ukraine Media Center today. Today, our first conversation will be devoted to the agrarian sector. So let's talk about its condition, about the way the warm winter influences the sowing season. And joining us in the studio is Taras Vysotskyi, First Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine. Good morning, Mr. Taras. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. So let's start our conversation with the overall condition. How have we entered the year 2025? How could you characterize our agrarian sector for the time being? Well, thank you. Ukrainian agrarians continue to work resiliently despite all of the challenges brought by the full-scale invasion. They continue ensuring internal stability and food security, making significant contribution to it on a global level. Talking about the summary of the year 2024, I would like to emphasize that in all of the territories under Ukrainian control, the sowing campaign has taken place. The territories are sown 98%. Relevant crops were harvested, and given the fact that it was another year of war, the results were pretty good. 20 million hectares when it comes to oil and technical and winter crops, and generally over 75 million tons of oil and cereal crops were harvested. So we have pretty good indicators. Agrarian sector continues to be export oriented. A larger amount of products are being exported, and thanks to the stable operation of Ukrainian grain corridor, the grain initiative. In fact, in the year 2024, the export of the agricultural goods amounted to $24.7 billion. So basically, it's the second historical maximum after the year 2021. But we understand that in the year 2021, the crops were harvested from completely different amount of areas. There was no occupation of almost 20% of the agricultural lands. So given all of the challenges, our agrarians demonstrated themselves as pretty resilient, and they continue working. So basically, they laid a foundation for the transition to this year's harvest, because the winter crops, first of all, the barley, rape, and wheat were sown in the autumn of the year 2024 in the area almost exceeding the territory of the last year. For some of the crops, it's about 3 to 5% increase. So again, the agrarian sector keeps working, laying the foundation for further work. And for the time being, when it comes to the spring campaign, all of the available territories are planned to be used and sown. So the last year proved to be pretty difficult, but the agricultural manufacturers continued being resilient, and about 275,000 hectares of agricultural lands were returned and released for use after proper processing and demining during the year 2024. So we not only use all of the available resources, but we take all of the possible efforts to return all of the land resources that were affected by mining or other challenges, one way or another related to war. Well, we understand that the exports is the most important component that influences not only the agrarian sector, but all of our country's economy in general. So talking about the last year, have we exported everything that we've planned, or do we have any residues that we still plan to export? So what are the plans? And again, when it comes to the export plans for the year 2025, what are they? Well, talking about residues, when logistics was complicated during the years 2022-23, during some periods this logistics was completely blocked, we've accumulated some residues with which we were entering the following year. But currently we don't have any residues above the standard. In fact, we have achieved the indicators when we export the current harvest. We don't have any transitional residues from previous periods that were resulting from complication of logistics. They don't exist anymore, so the export is pretty stable. Currently we export the amounts that were harvested, that were expected to be harvested in this season. It's worth mentioning that when it comes to exports and the oil crops, we mostly orient at the marketing year rather than calendar year. For example, for cereal crops, it's July, June. For example, so we're through the equator. It's only 5 months left to the next harvest, and the larger amount of the products is already exported, more than 60% of it. In fact, the amounts of exports are about 5.5 million tons per month, but that's sufficient to make it before the following harvest, to export everything on top of what is planned for internal consumption. It's safe to state that about 40-45 million of cereal crops are available for exports, and currently it looks like they're about to be exported, and about 17 million tons of oil crops and processed products, because we do a lot of processing, such as sunflower seeds waste, which is also exported. So again, currently, under conditions of war, it's difficult to plan something. The risks may arise every day, but currently, for the time being, we continue our exports according to the current needs without any disruptions. Well, I would like to touch upon the topic of the government support programs for the agrarians. We are all familiar with 579 program that proved itself pretty efficient, and it enjoys significant demand among the agrarians. So what are the plans for the year to come? We know that the biggest challenge of the program was to cover the needs of the agrarians in the areas close to the forward edge of the battle area. So to what extent are we able to cover their needs during this year? Well, definitely the agrarians are among the most active users of 579 program. We may safely state that more than half of the loans extended under 579 are extended to the agricultural manufacturers. The program continues this year, so that there is a confidence about it. The amount of 18 billion hryvnia is allocated to cover the potential expenditures of all of the agricultural manufacturers. On top of that, there is a dedicated subsection of the program for the agrarians, which is important. That provides certain benefits to them. The manufacturers can get up to 90 million hryvnia. For some areas, it's not always available. I mean, such an amount, again, that's a beneficial amount for the agrarians that was extended until the end of this year. The Parliament adopted relevant decision in the end of the last year, so the program is extended until March 31st, 2026, with a minimal horizon of 1 year. So this planning horizon is already ensured. Again, it's worth mentioning that for those agrarians who are involved in cattle farming, I mean, that's already a component of added value here, or those who are involved in processing, there is additional opportunity to raise an amount of up to 150 million hryvnias. And obviously the territories close to the front lines are identified as the zone of high war risk within 579 programs, so these subsectors continues working too. So the main benefit of it is that the loans are extended at lower interest. For example, we're mentioning the interest of 579% depending on the turnover funds in the zone of high war risk. The rate is below 5% because everybody understands that we should support those territories additionally. So again, the program continues during this year too. Thank you very much for your answer. That's really important. We know that unfortunately weather conditions sometimes result to be the factor that influences the agrarian sector. We understand, we see the warm winter. To what extent do you think this factor may influence the new agrarian season, its next phase? Well, first of all, the winter is different. There are still freezing temperatures forecasted until the end of this winter, but we're all feeling this winter is warmer than usual, but there is a number of aspects about it. First of all, the temperatures above zero, sometimes they help the vegetation. If the temperature is not too high, for example, to those crops that due to later sowing in autumn, they didn't get enough life force, well, it helps them. And on top of that, such a warm weather also contributes to development of different pests like weeds and bugs. So we will have to plan within the technological cycle, probably a little bit later in the spring, in summer, to use more pesticides and other means of protection of the plants. But our agrarians are ready for that. They are pretty professional from the point of view of their awareness of different technologies. They clearly understand when and what to use. It results in additional losses, but they're not critical. I mean, the additional treatment due to warm weather, treatment of plants. But again, we see the weather is changing, it's getting a little bit colder, and it's important to make sure that the vegetation doesn't resume too earlier. So far, we're not seeing any risks of that. And again, the condition of the sowing areas, we have one spring or winter ahead, so the condition of the crops is satisfactory, and we're not observing any cardinal influence on part of this global warming factor, the factor of warmer than usual spring. It didn't result in any additional consequences. And yet another topic of concern to all of the Ukrainians, the dynamics of price growth. So what is your forecast about the price growth for some groups of agricultural products? In general, what's going to happen in the agrarian sector? Well, I need to emphasize that if we analyze previous month or two, we can safely state that there was stabilization, and we are not observing any critical price growth. We see some of the products were getting more expensive in spring, but then they got cheaper, like for example the eggs, the borscht set, is not getting more expensive, so we're currently going through the period of certain stability. In autumn, there is a natural price growth period that was related to decrease of harvest and minor drought. But in fact, the decrease of harvest was reflected on the springs in September, October, and partial in November, but with no further influence. So again, there were certain international there was a price growth for dairy products on a global scale, but for the time being, from the perspective of analysis of current situation, we're not seeing any conditions that may potentially influence the prices in the next season, because this amount of harvest is already fixed. Yet another force majeure factor that may influence is the power supply, but hopefully the system will be able to make it. It's a current factor. Again, the trade is continuing, both export and import ways. If there is some short-term deficit, it may be covered by import, and again, the prices of import are equivalent to current global market prices. So except for some minor correction when 0.5% is added to the cost of storage, because you understand every month of storage adds more and more, but it doesn't change the price dramatically. It's just like 0.5% or something. So then in summer, during the harvest season, it will all depend on weather factors, the amounts of the harvest. If it's more than we expect, if it's more than forecasted amount, it will result in prices falling. But again, we observe stability in the market of dairy products with certain corrections. Obviously, there's always a lag, like 2 to 3 months from the change of milk price until this price reflects in the final products. So within the next 4 to 5 months, we should expect probably some correction in terms of decrease, and I'm quite optimistic. Well, comparing to the years 23-24, is there any change of the structure of crops we're sowing? What is decreasing, what is growing? Well, the soy and corn pair will experience significant changes. We've already mentioned that the winter crops area has increased 3%, but it's not a huge change. Again, classically, the sunflower, barley, peas, other crops such as buckwheat, which are really important, they don't occupy a lot of area. For example, sunflower takes a lot of place, but it's limited in terms of technology, so its area is not changing year to year. The biggest corrections are in the area of such crops as soy and corn. They always go in couple. Previously, there was a trend for the growth of soy areas, and we've achieved record areas, more than 2.6 billion hectares. That was a record for Ukraine, and that growth was continuing year to year from the year 22 to year 24, and the area of corn was decreasing, which was related mostly to the logistical complications. We had to increase the area of the crops that were trading at bigger price. Now the logistics was rectified, it works on a systemic basis, and it returned to the pre-war prices. It's not a key factor anymore. And now the income from 1 hectare of corn is again bigger than for soy. It was demonstrated by the survey that we've conducted. So again, there is a correction trend. The area of soy is going to decrease 10 to 15% within certain range, maybe a little bit more, but there will be a range like more or less like this. We'll see it in March, and the area of corn is going to increase significantly. So those are the major changes when we see that there is no such factor as extra expensive logistics anymore, and it's more about the price, global price of crops. What other trends developing in the global market may influence our agrarian sector this year? Well, since we're export-oriented, we keep experiencing this influence. For example, the trend that used to be midterm that influenced the growth of agricultural products is it influenced the production of dairy products. We keep observing the trend for the growth of volume of manufacture, of volume of production. The situation is pretty positive for the time being. There is no significant influence, but what is of potential influence and what keeps influences us on episodic basis when it comes to poultry and eggs. There is such a thing as bird flu, and when it erupts in certain regions of the world, creating deficit, well, we don't have this situation for the time being, but we cannot fully exclude that it may happen. And when it comes, for example, to pigs, it all depends a lot on the African pig plague, but there is yet another trend to consume more plant proteins. So this is what is going to regulate our agricultural market in terms of expanding the areas of pea sowing. And yet another global trend for healthy meals is the growth of consumption of oatmeal that will additionally result in expansion of areas of oat, which again is a positive phenomena because it may diversify the range of and structure of traditional crops that were previously of niche nature, and it will also additionally reduce the risk because when you get proceeds from different crops, it mitigates the effects of force majeure in this sector. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. If we have any questions on the floor, please let us know by raising your hand. And to finalize, to summarize, or I'm seeing we have a question.
Yes, hello. I'm Jacqueline Goebel. I'm reporting for German media about the wheat market. Sorry, I don't speak Ukrainian. And I would like to know how did the export markets develop, especially this winter? Were there any surprises? Did you see any changes in the countries that are especially taking wheat from or grains from Ukraine? And then I wanted to ask too, the last year, of course, we've seen some resentment from farmers in the EU. We all remember how the grain from Ukraine was spilled in Poland. So what effects did this have?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. Should I answer in English? Okay. So to avoid me, try to answer in English. So when we talk about wheat, usually most of the export of wheat, most volumes are done in July, November, because we have harvest in July and during these months. So we as a government signed with market representatives, traders, wheat producers, wheat processors, the memorandum, where we agreed that the maximum volume of wheat export within current market in year should be not exceed 16.2 million tons of wheat. So the calculation was done, which amount of wheat we need for the internal consumption, because it's a critical product and we definitely have to fulfill the internal demand, and we have this 16.2 million tons. So far, the export was something a little bit more than almost 11 million tons. So we see that this goal is not going to be exceeded. And now the volumes of export are a little bit less than 1 million per month. So we have enough for the internal consumption and for some export till new harvest. So nothing extraordinary, more or less common. And the same with other grains, first of all corn or maize, which also is exported to EU and other countries. Actually, so we did had some difficulties when we had the sea blockade with some export of grains to EU, when we had blockades on the borders. But so far, as almost 90% of export is done through the Black Sea, so it's not critical to get because the main consumers, for example, for Ukrainian grains are Spain, Italy, Netherlands, so those are not the nearest countries. And also we do keep being active on the program Grain from Ukraine. In this program, wheat, corn or flour goes to the Middle East or Africa, North Africa. This program is in place. Once again, the export through the program Grain from Ukraine is within the volumes of overall export, so it doesn't influence the internal situation because we have lots to export, much more than the possibility of charity organization and others to support the grain from Ukraine. But it's still in place and keeps operating, and it once again shows the importance of Ukrainian grain in also social political stabilization in different countries. For example, we were among the first ones to send 500 wheat flour to Syria just after the changing of political situations there.
Дякую вам дуже, дякую, що доєдналися до нашого ефіру. І нагадаю, шановні колеги, з нами був
Thank you very much for joining our broadcast, dear colleagues. Let me remind you, joining us was Taras Vysotskyi, the first Deputy Minister of Agricultural Policy and Food of Ukraine, and join us in a couple of minutes will be Fedor Venislavsky, member of Ukrainian Parliament's Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence. And let's continue working together for a victory. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Thank you.